So I'm making another video about the Russians, and appropriately I'm drinking vodka. Na zdrowie! Na zdrowie. That's cheers in Russian. Oh, I love the Novichok. Oops. Whoops! Wrong bottle. Now, joking aside, why the Russians kill who they kill in the West, and why the Russians use the means they use when they kill people in the West? It turns out that these details tell us a lot about the motivation of the Russians, why they are doing it. And the first thing we notice that the Russians want to be caught red-handed. They want to be known who has done it. So, for example, they killed Litvinenko with a very hard to come by substance that only a handful of governments have access to. So this immediately narrows the list of the suspects, and they proceeded to kill, to assassinate the Skripals using an even rarer substance, the Novichok I was joking about, which is available to, as far as I know, only one government. And there is also this thing who they were assassinating, because there are weird facts there as well. For example, there are two prominent people who escaped, who betrayed GRU, the Russian military intelligence, and who live in Britain, but they assassinated only one of them, not the other. But that's a long conversation, so let's focus on the Novichok and the radioactive polonium they used on Litvinenko. So we see immediately that the Russians didn't use means that would have allowed them a plausible deniability. They didn't use guns. What's more, the Russians, we quote sources on this, have means that are practically undetectable for killing people. They had these means ever since Stalin was in power. So they could have done it without a trace, so that it looks like dying of natural causes or like an accident, or even if they didn't want to bother with complications, they could have simply shot these guys, just like they shot, for example, this Russian pilot who defected to Ukraine, and they found him eventually in Spain, and they simply shot him. I don't remember how many bullets, but they riddled him with bullets. That this is how they did it. Now, why the Russians want to be known who has done it? This brings us to why they're doing it. Because apart from becoming known that the Russian government has done it, there is nothing to be gained there. For example, the Skripal was a nobody. He didn't matter. The same could be said of Litvinenko. But to the Russian public it mattered, because it showed the Russian public that the Russians are not to be trifled with. That Russia is still a great power. This is how they understand greatness in Russia. In Russia, to be violent and to be dangerous is to be great. So you should keep in mind that the Russian mindset is closer to the mindset of the Vikings rather than to the most modern Westerners. So greatness for the Russian is important, greatness of the government, because the Russians have miserable lives. I mean, their lives consist of constant struggle, the standard of living is low, nothing works, the roads are horrible, the corruption is everywhere, but there is one consolation. They fear us, the West fears us. we are great. I mean, this is like all those frustrated boys who watch Superman, and imagine that they're Clark Kent. This is why Clark Kent in his everyday life poses like a nerd. He's a reporter who, I mean, I don't speak English well enough to describe a loser.
Yeah, he's a bit geeky, a bit sensitive. He doesn't get the
Yes.
girl. However, when he's Superman, yeah,
Yes.
the girls all
yes,
want him.
Yes. So something of the kind happens with the Russians. So the Russians are humiliated in their everyday lives, but when they switch the TV on and when they hear that, for example, the traitors have been found, even in the West, they cannot hide. We have long arms. Our government, we they associate these things, has long arms, and Putin is doing the right thing, and Putin is punishing the traitors. And this matters to them. And this tells us why Putin does these things. Because they make him popular. And if something doesn't make him popular, it would be if he could not kill somebody. So if you think that Putin loses, Putin's image will be damaged in Russia because he's a murderer and he's a corrupt, organized criminal, no. Unfortunately, it works exactly in the opposite way. The more corrupt Putin is, the more horrible he is, the more he is respected by the Russians, because the Russians want to be like him. That's it. And unfortunately, not many in the West paid attention to these details about the means used. They thought that the West is full of itself. The Westerners are arrogant people who believe they know everything, and they believe that we caught them red-handed because we are so clever. We prove that that must be the Russian government. Well, the Russian government wants you to prove it. This is why they have done it, so that you can catch them. The Russian government is playing like a cat with a mouse, playing with you.
So they want to be caught?
Yeah, they want to be caught.
Because they know they're not going to get punished by us.
Well, obviously they wouldn't get punished. Actually, they will get rewarded. And they got rewarded, and this is what the chapter is about. Because Russia actually was rewarded for its bad behavior when Russia began to attack Ukraine in 2014. And it was rewarded with sanctions. And when a Westerner hears this, the Westerner's reaction would be, you're not making any sense. How could you reward people with sanctions? Actually, you could, because you give the Russian leadership what it craves. The Russian leadership wants to portray the West as hostile, as encroaching on the Russian independence, blah, blah, blah. And the West, by imposing these meaningless sanctions, they were mostly meaningless. They didn't really hurt the Russian economy, but they were meaningful in a sense that they helped the Russian propaganda, that the West is hostile, the West is anti-Russian. So the West played exactly its part in the Putin's play. And this continued even after 2022, remarkably. Although the sanctions now are more radical, but here are two examples. So, because the West discussed for a year about the oil sanctions, the prices of oil rose, and the Russian Federation made a killing selling oil during 2022. Actually, the Russian economy grew. The Russian economy was booming because of the sanctions. And here's another example. And don't take my word for it. Bloomberg wrote about this. So Russia suffered, ever since the fall of socialism, Russia suffered from capital drain. Because whatever the Russian oligarchs could snatch, grab in Russia, they would usually invest in the West. They would usually send the money to the West in one form or another. But because of the banking sanctions, because the West wanted to punish Russia after 2022, it became harder for them to, the capital flight became harder. And so now, like it or not, they have to invest in the Russian economy. So the Western sanctions actually boosted the Russian economy. The Western sanctions are unproductive. And don't take me wrong, by the way, I'm totally anti-Russian and we are totally pro-Ukrainian. I mean, by we, I mean the two of us who wrote this book.
That's me.
Yes, that's me and her. But unfortunately, the West doesn't realize, because the West does things, the Western politicians also do things for local consumption, to please the Western public rather than to be efficient. And unfortunately, the West did little to help Ukraine and to hurt Russia. That's it.